We continue our story on the now designated Autobot ship, as the Autobots pretty much killed Lockdown and simply left Earth. However, before we continue with the Autobots, what does happen on Earth, considering they did leave with Galvatron getting away? Well, here's the thing. Considering they never captured Optimus, this does mean that Galvatron never gets the seed. Pretty fortunate, but also there's the unfortunate part that, yeah, Galvatron still, activates himself when he probably senses that Cybertron or, the Cybertronians or the Autobots have simply fled the planet. And, what do you think is going to happen when Cade is not able to warn him because, he doesn't have the Autobots, he doesn't have anyone but simply himself? I doubt Joshua is really going to believe him as well, considering the fact that they did just slaughter the lab and, well, did go to get Cade. So Joshua is likely not going to believe it, considering all, if not a large majority of his life's work is gone. But considering the fact that there are fewer KSI drones than the original, because the Autobots did destroy nearly all of his lab and just straight up wreck the place, I think it is safe to say that the Galvatron uprising isn't as bad as it was in the original, so it's not as bad. Meanwhile, on the Autobot ship in the far out reaches of space, this is where they actually are discussing where they should simply go. But we do see a moment where Jazz, Cliffjumper, and Smokescreen do simply walk amongst themselves and actually are discussing what they should do now. They honestly, aren't going to really find anything on Cybertron, so maybe there are other worlds out there they can just simply inhabit for the time being, but this is where they actually discover the Dinobots. And this time I'm going to have the original 5. Grimlock, Strafe, Scorn, Slug, and Slash. So they actually find them, and this is where they kind of explain the situation and, well, let them out. With the Dinobots kind of being grateful here, but again, they don't know where they are, or, they know where they are, but, they don't know where they're going. And so this is where Jazz is able to explain to Grimlock that, well, they managed to not only kill Lockdown, but confiscate the ship, and they're just going to whatever planet they can find at the moment until further notice, and he would be happy if they just join him for the moment. Considering the fact that they just got freed, and they really don't have any reason to fight against the ones that freed them, the Dinobots ultimately just go along with the Autobots here. So this also does mean that eventually they do discover the seed. And let's say RC, Chromia, and Bumblebee are the ones to discover it. Kind of just giving more characters more time and a bit more, things to do on the ship. And they relay this information to Optimus, who's simply sitting in the command chair talking to the likes of Hound, Sideswipe, and Mirage. Or at least they're all standing beside him or, standing around him and simply discussing that, they don't blame Optimus for what they did, and they don't think it's out of character. Keep in mind that Baver's Optimus represents a war veteran that has simply had enough. That is what Baver's Optimus is meant to be. He's not meant to be like the classic G1 and stuff like that, where he's all hopeful and optimistic. He's not like IDW, where he's hopeful and optimistic, but will still, tear your head off in a heartbeat. He is a veteran that has had enough. And eventually, I think we all can agree that at some point, we all would have had enough too. Especially after all the nonsense the humans did. The Autobots are justifiably leaving, have already left the planet. And, well, they don't really care what happens anymore. They don't care what goes on with Earth. They don't even care if it dies. And again, you might say this is an Autobot-like, but keep in mind what they just been through. And keep in mind, with Jazz being alive, he's someone that'll call it out, considering that is always been his character, to always call something out, whether it's hypocritical or something that just doesn't help them in general. For example, like when he called out Optimus for not really going after the humans when they captured Bumblebee, and telling him how wrong it was to really put the humans' lives above his own. But again, he did kind of relent to his leader because they got what they need. They got what they ultimately desire, which was the glasses, and still the bigger threat was out there, that being the Decepticons. And so, with that being said here, what do the Autobots do now that they have the seed? Well, this is where they make their way towards Cybertron. And everything kind of happens a bit differently here, considering the fact that they do still discover Cybertron in ruins. But this time, here's the difference. Optimus didn't make that long trip. Optimus never wasted any energon, putting him in a stasis lock, meaning this is a full strength Optimus, albeit he did not touch the Sword of Judgment or the Star Saber or what. No, it actually was the Sword of Judgment, excuse me. So he does not have that upgrade. And so this is where when the Dinobots actually see they're on Cybertron, they're able to sense Quintessa. They sense her presence. They sense that power. And it actually shakes them to the core. And believe it or not, I do think this does make sense considering they were legendary knights. And instead of having them, just be one-off, barely marketable or barely presented, characters, they're going to be kind of at the forefront here. Where even Grimlock simply explains that, they can sense Quintessa. They can sense their creator, if you will. The great deceiver herself is there. And again, they don't like what they sense. However, this is where Sideswipe picks out something, a bogey, something flying at him. And when he looks at it, he's like, oh God, what the heck? Is that a dragon? And this is where we get to see Dragonstorm. Now again, a big difference and a big change because again, Dragonstorm was a cool concept. And it would have been nice if he actually did fight Optimus in the last night, like the promotional material had it. However, unfortunately, that was never going to happen because unfortunately, once again, we have to understand that Michael Bay can't really, I'm not saying he's a bad director when it comes to human-based movies, but Transformers, it just isn't, a human-based type of movie. We came here for giant robots, Michael, not the human military. We do not care for them. But, it is what it is. The franchise is already out, and I understand. But here's the thing. With Dragonstorm attacking the Autobot ship, this does put them at a very big disadvantage, at least for right now. And so when Dragonstorm blasts the ship down, it does crash, unfortunately. And this is where the Autobots are a little bit roughed up from it, but they do make their way out. And so this is where they actually, begin storming the main center with Dragonstorm all behind them. However, seeing that they're not going to, get away from it, this is where Jazz simply states he'll hold it off. However, this is where the Dinobots stop with him and simply turn into their alt modes. Each one being, their respective ones. T-Rex, Pteranodon, Spinosaurus, Velociraptor, and the good old-fashioned Triceratops. We all love them, and we all need them. And this is where we actually see Jazz and the Dinobots take on Dragonstorm. The fight begins. Dragonstorm launches a triple-headed fire breath, but Grimlock immediately counters it. Seeing that Dragonstorm is going to be a pain in the air, this is where Jazz, noticing that Strafe is the flyer of the group, hops on his back and tells him to trust him, but they're going to be working together to make sure he stays grounded. So Strafe goes into the air with Jazz on his back, as Grimlock pretty much makes sure that any fire breath attacks are countered, while Slug, Scorn, and Slash pretty much wait for their opportunity. And this is where we actually get a pretty impressive aerial fight between Jazz and, Dragonstorm, or at least Jazz and Strafe versus Dragonstorm. Using the Cybertron environment around them, they're actually able to loop around, and thanks to Strafe being a lot more agile and a lot smaller than Dragonstorm, he's actually able to not only outmaneuver the dragon, but actually able to get behind him, and Jazz unloads the full power of his crescent cannon, just simply bombarding him from the air, while Strafe simply just, I guess you could say, dives onto him and hooks the talons into his back and bites down on the first, or at least, the right and left heads of Dragonstorm, meaning the middle head is able to shift around and tries to bite him. However, Jazz utilizes his bladed javelin to actually counter it and actually begins beating on the head. No diddy. And this is where they actually guide Dragonstorm, or at least force Dragonstorm, right back to the rest of the Dinobots, causing it to disengage, and he has to transform in order to land. This allows the other Dinobots to do what they have to do. Slug runs right into him, goring him and tearing off a leg. This is where Scorn then comes in, utilizing basically a bowling ball maneuver, and takes out at least an arm, while Slash simply goes for the head. And well, it's pretty vicious what she can do. Her name is Slash for a reason. So Dragonstorm ain't really have no type of face after that. Meanwhile, in the central chamber, this is where we see Optimus obviously has already met with Quintessa, and he pretty much gets restrained. However, this is where the rest of the Autobots are fighting against Infernicus and a couple Decepticons. Let's say that the main Decepticon drones are pretty much being handled by RC, Chromia, and Hound, while Bumblebee, Sideswipe, Mirage are pretty much fighting against Infernicus, utilizing their close quarters combat, or at least their much more agile close quarters combat, to their advantage, and being able to not only get around him and outmaneuver him, but straight up disengage him from all of his parts. Let's say it's because Sideswipe is able to finally, run up a wall or something, and then actually utilize his blade to go right through the same spot Optimus did in disengaging him. However, this does leave them with 5 parts, but this is where Smokescreen comes in and actually utilizes his static smokescreen ability and, well, paralyzes them, allowing Cliff Jumper to slice a few in half, while the others do their, own thing and pretty much decimate them. But this is where Quintessa manages to still mind control Optimus. And well, when Jazz and the rest of the Dinobots get in there, this is where they're looking like, oh my God. No, not you. Not you, Optimus. And well, unfortunately, this is still a full-strength Optimus. But this is where something different happens. Instead of him getting the Sword of Judgment, this is where Quintessa actually hands him a weapon that I think would be much more devastating. And that is the Sword Raceling. And that's where we're going to leave it off here, you guys. Please comment down below, like and subscribe and share with your friends. And the last part will be the finale of this series. I hope you guys enjoyed it so far. And I understand I have been keeping it a little bit short and brief, but that's because I want to end this off on a much better note. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and yeah, peace.